Hello everyone, welcome to the July edition of Colombo JS Meetup. This is the episode 2. So this is the first time we are doing this meetup twice in once a month. So this is the kind of a special meetup, and I'm going to welcome Ben from Auth0. He's actually currently based in Australia, and it's kind of a night for him now. So thank you very much, Ben, for thank you very much, Ben, joining with us. I think it was a kind of a discussion to get you in here about.
Yes, I'm very grateful to you and everybody who's come along today as well for coming to a slightly earlier meetup. It is 9 p.m. here, so normally your meetup is at midnight, and I'm very grateful to not be up that late.
Yeah, that's cool. And thank you very much for being online in our other meetups also to make this facilitate, and glad to have you as a speaker.
Yep.
So Ben is going to talk about, Ben actually works for Auth0, company actually working for identity as a service. And he's actually going to talk about Jamstack and about authentication with the Jamstack. So you have kind of static web HTML pages and how you're going to do the authentication with that one. So I'm not the one who actually going to explain it, and Ben is the one who going to give you more information about it. So I'm going to handle all the session to the Ben. So Ben, stage is yours.
Alrighty, thank you. I'll just try and share my screen. Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming along. I do work for Auth0. I've been very glad to sponsor the Colombo JS Meetup over the past the online ones over the past few months. It's been fun to, and like I say, it has been very late at night for me, but I have half listened in and then fallen asleep before the end of the meetup. And I'm very much looking forward to staying awake to the end of this one. I have a coffee just to keep me going. I better stir my milk in. And we'll see how we go. I want to do something slightly different this afternoon. Normally, what happens at a meetup is you get like a half-half talk and demo, or maybe mostly talk and a little bit of demo. I want to quickly go through what the Jamstack is, just to bring everybody up to speed, and maybe stick a comment on the YouTube video if you're watching there, or into the Zoom chat, and just put a +1 up if you've ever used Jamstack before. I'll be interested to see how many of you are familiar with it already. But I'll take you through what Jamstack is, and then we're going to jump straight into a demo. And I want to go from absolutely nothing, like an empty directory, and we're going to set up a brand new Gatsby app. We're going to create an Express API. We're going to, chat who's used it, we're going to integrate FaunaDB for a database and Auth0 for authentication. And basically what I want to do within about 45 minutes, hopefully, is get a blog up and running with a authenticated comment system. So let's see how we go. What can go wrong? All right, so a little bit of an introduction for me already. I've been a software engineer for over 20 years. Most of my passion is around security and privacy, and that kind of led over the process of my career to me finally working for Auth0. I've been working there for about almost 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in September. I work there as a developer advocate, which basically means that it's my job to make sure that developers feel supported in using Auth0, but also more broadly talking about security and identity principles to the community, and making sure that Auth0 know what the community need. So I'm kind of like that middle ground, that glue between the community and the company. I sit on that edge. So I kind of feel like I work as much for you as I do for Auth0. So let's have a look at what the Jamstack is. Jam is based up of the initials JAM for JavaScript, API, and markup. Unlike things like the LAMP stack or the MERN stack or any of the other stacks you might have heard of before, which are actually specific technologies. MERN is Mongo, Express, I can't remember what and I can't remember what, Node probably, and React, I think. So those are actual technology names, whereas Jamstack is more about principles or philosophies. You have JavaScript, APIs, and markup, which all come together to create an application in multiple parts. So you've got your application logic, which sits in the JavaScript, and that's a statically generated document. It's more about how your application runs. You will obviously write your own JavaScript to do the logic that's required, but it's not dynamically generated. It's a static application that gets sent to the browser and gets run in the browser. That application will then use markup for the actual content. And the blog that we're going to look at today uses markdown files to generate each of the blog pages. And then So from that, you can generate your application. And then you have APIs. And the APIs are what gives your application the ability to be a bit more dynamic once it's running. Once it's in the browser already, once the JavaScript has pulled in all the markdown and has generated a website from the static stuff, they can then add dynamic stuff in through API calls. And traditionally, there are frameworks already around. You can either use vanilla JavaScript, or maybe you've used React, Vue, or Angular, or any of the other single page apps frameworks before to talk to APIs more easily. So taking that the generator side of things, we've got, so that's the single page app, and React is more the single page app side of things, but then we've got generators. So a static site generator is something that will actually create the static files that are generated in the first place. So if you've ever used React, you know that you build a new React app, you've got a whole lot of code that gets sent to the browser, but that React app doesn't change unless you change it. Gatsby and Hugo and Jekyll will allow you to generate the React app or whatever, like a Vue app or something else, from other source files. So it's almost like a two-step process. You can get the application logic actually to compile and build the HTML and data. So it's, I don't know if that makes sense, but you've got a second step. You're actually using Gatsby. In our case, Gatsby is based on React, but Gatsby actually generates a React application, and React then runs in the browser. Obviously, you've got the markup that gets pulled in as well. So whereas React would pull in the markup and render it in real time in your browser, Gatsby can actually pull the markup and convert it into JSON and store it inside your React application, which makes it a lot faster to generate because it doesn't need to go through the processing of understanding what the markdown file looks like anymore. It just looks directly at the JSON file. And then you can also pull in API data. So before the application is even built, before your React app is ready to be deployed into or to be run in a browser, you can pull information from APIs to actually generate even more content that is effectively turned into static content that's served from your website. So all of these three parts, the JavaScript, the markup, and the APIs, can themselves be combined into an application. So from this point here, you're now running, you've used Gatsby, which is what we'll be looking at today. You've used a static site generator to generate a dynamic site like a React application. And those React applications will also be able to talk to the APIs. But obviously at this point, the application's running in the browser. Before this point, Gatsby and all of the static site generators, they'll be running either on your development environment, which is an environment you trust, or in a production environment during build process, which is also an environment you trust. And you can put secret keys in there, and they're not going to be distributed. Whereas when you're running something in your browser, you're actually going to be running in essentially an untrusted environment. You don't know what plugins are running. You don't know whether the site is susceptible to cross-site scripting. You don't even know what browser it's running in. So there's a lot of trust involved with what you put into your browser-based single-page applications. So you can't put a secret key in there to be able to talk to the APIs, because otherwise everybody has access to that secret key. So the way you can authenticate is to use an identity management platform like Auth0. There are plenty of others around as well. Have a look into them. And they take off the load completely of having to manage all of the authenticated communications with APIs that require that authentication. Obviously, there's always going to be a situation, and we've got one today, where you have a publicly available API. But when you need to protect that API endpoint, you can use an identity management system that supports Auth0 and OpenID Connect in order to make sure that only those people who are meant to get the APIs are actually getting that data out. So the way that happens is you will redirect the user to a login page, which is hosted by the identity provider. And the identity provider will provide back to your application, the one running in the browser, a token. And that token can then be sent to the API. And the API can look at the signature of that token and verify that the token is valid, hasn't expired, is actually intended for that API. And therefore, the request that the user's made is valid. So that's a really quick overview. Let's jump straight into the application. So I promised you there was an empty directory. I lied a little bit. There's a README file and there's a schema. The README file is basically step-by-step, and I haven't, this is a brand new demo that I just wrote earlier today. I haven't put this into GitHub yet, but I will share a link to this with the group after the end of tonight. I'll push it into GitHub. So the README file, the step-by-step process that I'm going to go through tonight to make sure that I fit in with time. And schema is basically, if we have a look at the schema file, is basically the schema of data that we're storing. So we're going to need to store in our GraphQL database, and we're using Fauna today, an author of a comment, the message of the comment, and the post slug, because obviously comments are associated with a post. So that's all that I've got to start with. So the first thing we want to do is to generate a brand new Gatsby application. So what you'd normally do is you type something like Gatsby new, give it a directory name like blog, and then an endpoint or an example. You can omit this part completely and just get a standard clean Gatsby application. In this case, I want to start with a Gatsby starter blog. So what's happening now is Gatsby, which is an application that I've installed on my laptop already, is going off and pulling down this starter blog from their GitHub repository, bringing it down. Now this is an NPM JavaScript-based application. It's based on React, yeah? So we've got the application on our laptop now. We're running npm install in the background, and it's pulling down all the files that we need. I've got a backup version ready to go if this takes too long, but I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to do this in time. And I'd really love to kind of prove that it is possible to do a whole website blog with a commenting system in 45 minutes without cheating, without having waypoints already set up in advance. If we get to a point later on in the presentation where it looks like we're falling short on time, I can just start copying and pasting stuff in. So we're all good. So at the moment, it's still pulling down all of the includes. You can see here that the node modules directory is being created. So this is actually the npm install process running. So far, all I've done is I've run this one command line here, and it's installing stuff in the background. What I'll do is I'll just open a new tab. So we're in the same directory here still. And I'm just going to start code, VS Code in the foreground, so that we can start having a look at the, if I can find out where that window went on one of my screens. There it is. So we can see the application loading in here at the moment, and we've got our schema. This is the schema document we looked at before, and hopefully this has finished soon. It hasn't finished. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cheat at this point because it's obviously, oh, I think we've just gotten onto the fast part. Let's give it a few more seconds. I think we're just about there. And what we want to do is we'll go into the blog directory that we just created, and we'll run Gatsby develop. This is going to start our local Gatsby development environment, which is going to compile the application and then start a node server so that we can actually look at the website locally on port 8000. I think the internet in Australia just slowed down in the past 10 minutes. That's looking like we're almost there now. This is where I need some lift music, perhaps, or perhaps I need to tell a joke. I've actually tried telling jokes on stage before, but the problem with me is that I can never remember jokes. So I start asking the question, and then I can never remember the punchline, or something more often, actually, I just give away the joke entirely before I even get to the end of the question. So we've added the packages. It looks like we're on the final stages here. It's taken almost 3 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience. There we go. Okay, so what would normally happen is you just go into the blog directory and run Gatsby develop. That's something we're doing over here already. We've gone into the blog directory. Let's run Gatsby develop over here. So like I mentioned, this is now going to start the local build. And what Gatsby is doing at this point is we've got this Gatsby node, and I'm not going to go too into depth on how this already works, but Gatsby node is a file that's basically used to generate content. And we're looking in here at using the blog post template and all the content that's in the content blog directory here. And like I mentioned before, they're all markdown files. So each of these markdown files here will create a different blog page. If we look at the hello world, for example, it's basically just standard markdown with a little bit of metadata at the top there. So if we close that and we go down and look at the source templates blog post, this is the template that was mentioned in the other document as being the one to be rendered. So basically for every single blog post in this content directory, Gatsby is currently generating, based on this template, a new blog post. So if we open this up now, we'll go straight in and we'll see the 3 blog posts there straight away that we saw before. And if we go inside, we'll see the content formatted nicely. So we're at the first point. What I want to do is add some comments down to the bottom here. So generally, this is not a bad idea, especially for a startup blog, because the markdown files, if you want to put a new blog post in, you create it in your application, you rebuild, you push to production, that's fine. That's a great way of minimizing the amount of time required and the complexity in generating databases of information or setting up a headless CMS. You just put it into Markdown. Maybe in the future, you'll look at expanding that. But comments can't work that way, because your users can't just commit something into Git in order to put a comment in. That wouldn't make sense. So for that, we're going to have to use a database. So let's come down to the bottom here, just after the article, before the navigation. So that's this point right here. And we want to add some comments in. So I'm going to go pretty quickly into React and Gatsby. If you're not fully familiar with Gatsby or React, don't worry too much. I'm not going into anything here that you won't cover in a half-day tutorial on how to use Gatsby or React. I want to insert a new component, and it's going to be called comments. And I want to pass into that the post slug, which is the way we're going to identify which page we're showing the comments for. And we're going to pass the slug of this page in. Now, at the moment, that component doesn't exist. We'll need to write that, but also the slug doesn't exist. Now, when Gatsby generates all these applications, it passes page context in. One of those extra bits of page context we can get is the slug. So that slug is now going to get passed through. Let's generate the new component. So we'll have a file here called comments.js. And as with all good React components, we're going to import React from React. Helps if I can spell properly. There we go, no more red squiggly lines. We're going to import React from React, and we're going to define our comments component. And we know that our comments component is going to get a post slug as one of the parameters. And then obviously we're also going to need to export default comment. And I think it was comments actually, not comment, singular. So I need to make sure those all line up. And now in blog post, I can come in and I can import comments from the components directory. There's now the comments. So if I hit save on both of these, we should still get a good compilation down here. There is an issue because we've defined things we're not using, but if I refresh this page, we should still have our, okay, we are getting an issue because we're not returning anything from the comments yet. So let's continue developing this component here. So one thing we know we're going to want is a form for people to be able to type in the message that they want to post. So if we put in a return block here, this is going to, I need to close that one there as well. Now this is going to basically return a fragment which has a form. Inside that form we have a text area and a button. The button says submit. The text area contains the value of message, which is stored. We actually need to find that up at the top here in a constant. So we're going to use state for this. So we have message and set message. If you're not familiar with this, have a look at the functions-based components and how they use set state. So we'll use, or just use state rather. So we're going to define the default message to be a blank string. So this is now a blank string. We can use the set message method to update that value. So the text area is blank, and when there's a change, we take the target, the value of this text area, and we pass it into set message. I've also just put a width and a height on here to make it a bit prettier. So if I hit save, we get an error, submit is not defined, because I haven't defined the function yet. So for now, let's just define a function called submit. Into this, we get an event. And for now, first thing we want to do is prevent default, so that we don't actually go to another page. And then let's, for now, just alert the message. So we're getting a success. Excellent. Let's come back into our application, hit refresh. Now we should get exactly the same thing, except down at the bottom here now, we have our comment form. Okay, so I'm just going to open up the console here. We don't need it just yet, but we're going to need it in the future. So let's just get this all set up. So if we put in a message and hit submit, we get an alert saying test. That's great. So that's not very helpful. We need to save that somewhere. Now, obviously, this is all running in the browser. So let's send this off to an API somewhere. So the first thing we want to do is to use fetch. And I'm just doing a little bit of copying and pasting here to make life a little easier. There we go. So we're going to call fetch, and we're going to create an API on localhost port 3000, and we're going to pass into it the post slug as the second argument after, or the path after comments. I'm going to remove all the slashes though. If we didn't have that in there, then when I hit save, let's just see what that looks like. When I hit submit over here, we're going to get a cross-origin request, which we'll fix in a second. But if I hit that over here, then you'll see there's actually got extra slashes in there, and that's not very clean. So I'm basically putting an extra bit of code in here just to remove all the slashes in the string. So if we save that again and refresh this, we'll see that it's now just making a request directly to comment/new beginnings, which is the new beginnings taken from the slug here. Right, so we're at this point. We need to know what to pass in though. So the first thing is defining the method. We're going to use post here. Get doesn't make sense. We're passing new information in. We're also going to need to provide headers. And the main header that we need to start with is, because we're working with JSON, is the content type. And we're going to set that to application JSON. And then finally, we need to send in the information that we actually want to submit. So we need to provide a body. Now the body is a string, but I want to generate JSON to send in there. So I'm going to use the JSON stringify method. And in here, we're going to pass an object. And this object is going to contain a message, which will be message, and an author, which I don't know what that's going to be yet. Let's just pass in a question mark. One of the things about JavaScript is, or well, the later ECMAScripts, is that if the key is the same as the variable name, you can actually just pass in message like that. So we're going to pass in the message and an author. We'll define the author later at some point. So now we need an API. So let's start in a separate directory. So we'll go back up into our Jamstack directory. We'll make a directory called API, and we'll go in there, and we're just going to do npm. Actually, let's do npm init first, and then we can do npm install express. So what this is going to do is just set up some basic packages that we need for running Express app. We'll create a new file called index.js in here, and index.js. And in here, we're now going to write our basic API. So first thing is we need to get express. So that's just a simple require. And then once we've got that, we can say we want a new app, and that's just going to be the execution of express. So now we've got an app running. Typo. We saw the cause error before. Because we're going between port 3000 and port 8000, it's essentially two different websites. So let's also install the cause module. So now we can do const cause is require cause. And then the Express app has this great way of just allowing the whole application to use a module in whatever way it seems fit. So we're just going to pass in cause here. And what this is going to do is make the whole application usable without any cross-origin issues that we faced in the browser before. From here, we're just going to create our first endpoint. So we had post for comments, and we had the post slug passed in. So let's grab that. And then we're going to call a function which has a request and a response as an input. And for now, we're just going to send a response.json and send a blank object back, just so we can test to see if the API is working. And then finally, we're going to listen on port 3000. So we'll save that, come down here, run node index.js. So we've now got our API running on port 3000 in just 11 lines of code, including blank lines. That's pretty cool. So let's hit submit on here again. Now we can see we're getting a 200 response. So it's working, but obviously at the moment it's not doing anything. We're getting the blank object response back. The request we're sending in, though, does have the message and the author. So let's just jump in here and see what that looks like. So console.log, let's just have a look at the request.body. Request.body. So we need to restart Node down here every time we make a change here. So we've done that. Let's come back in, hit submit again, and jump back over here. It's coming up as undefined. Now, this is one of the trickiest ones to debug because it's not really helpful at this point. But essentially what's happening is we're assuming that the information coming in here is JSON, but the items coming through is a string. And basically Express doesn't know what to do with that. It's trying to be clever and get the body to be what we're expecting it to be. So what we can do at this point here is we can do another app.use, and we can call express.json. And what this does is this is a method inside the Express object that will automatically look for data coming in. And if it sees it as JSON, it's going to format it as JSON. So if I save that, restart the API again, and hit submit, we can now see the JSON coming through. That's great. So we know that request.body contains the JSON that we want to store. Next thing we need to do is store it somewhere. So let's have a look at Fauna. This is a database in the cloud system. I'm going to create a new database called demo. And to set up the information quickly, we can just import a schema. And we're going to import the schema from here, which then will automatically create for us a collection. And we can see over here that it's created a type of comment, the author, the post slug, and the message. It also has a timestamp and an ID. It'll create that for us automatically. And it's automatically created this comments collection over here. And if we look inside, there are no documents there yet. So let's add a document to this. First thing, let's stop the API again, and we're going to install the FaunaDB extension. FaunaDB. There we go. So, yep, that's happened nicely. So now what we need to do is define a client to be able to talk to Fauna. So actually, the first thing we need to do is pull in Fauna. So let's do that at the top here. We want to define Fauna. I keep putting a D in there for some reason. FaunaDB, probably because there's a D coming after it, is require FaunaDB. And we're also going to put a little helper in here because we use this a lot. So Q is going to be equal to FaunaDB.query. So now in here, we can create a new client, which is going to be a new FaunaDB client. And we need to provide one bit of information in here, and that's the secret. So this is one of the reasons we need the API. We can't send this secret from the browser because it's not safe to store it in the browser. So let's come into the security tab over here, create a new key, hit save, and we're just going to copy this. For any of you following along at home, feel free to copy that. I'll be deleting this again afterwards. So that's fine. All right, so we've got our client connection now. Now we need to make a query. So we'll do client.query. And the query we want to create, we're now going to use the FaunaDB query object, so Q. And the thing that we want to do first is create. So there's the create there already. The thing that we want to create is a reference to the collections. So this is what it created automatically for us, called comment. So that schema that we pulled in automatically created this comment collection, and we want to create an object of type collections comment. And the information that's going in there is going to be an object, and it has to start with data, because that's where we pass our information in. And the author is going to be the request.body. We know that request.body gets this information in. We saw it just there. So request.body.author. The message is going to be request.body.message. And the post slug is going to be request. Now, instead of .body, we know that it's part of the parameters up here. So this is the parameter called post slug. So there's going to be a params object on the request called post slug. And in fact, VS Code has even pulled that out for us. So this here is essentially going to create the new record for us. That's all we need to do. So I'm just going to hit save. It's just done some reformatting. Let's restart the API again. Now, if I hit submit over here again, we should now see in here under collections a comment. The new comment has just come in. So that's what we've done in the API. We just added, there's the code gone. We added 8 lines of code, 9, 10, plus the 12 lines of code, and we're now writing information to the database already. So that's great. Now what we need to do is read that information out again. So let's go back over here. Let's try and get all of the posts that have, or the comments that have been added displayed at the top here. So let's take this, break this down step by step again. We'll come back into the comments, and here where we've got the form, let's for now just try and print out what we can get. So I'm going to use JSON stringify again, and we're going to take all of our comments. I'm just going to put in 0,4. This is going to provide a little bit of formatting for the JSON that gets sent back so we can make it more easily readable. We need to define what comments is. So in the same way as we've got this state up here for message, let's create one for comments. So we want comments and set comments, which is going to use state. And by default, I want comments to be an empty array. Now we need to pre-fill that somehow. One of the things I love about the function-based components in React is you can use the useEffect method, which basically you pass a function into. So we'll have a function, and I don't really mind what the input parameters are. And into the second parameter, you put in an array of variables or functions that the useEffect is going to be reliant on. If you don't pass anything in, if you give it an empty array, it's going to run first time the component loads and only that time. So that's what we want at the moment. The first time it loads, let's pull in a whole lot of comments. So in order to do that, we're going to use the fetch command. So in this case, we're going to fetch the same URL, but it's going to be a GET request this time. So there's the end of our fetch. Once we've made that fetch, the default is GET already. So then what we want to do, we know the response is going to be JSON. So we need to decode that first. So this now will return a promise of the JSON version of the response. So now we can take the information from that JSON, which we're actually just going to pass. We want the comments to be the JSON response. So I'm just going to call set comments in here directly, which is going to effectively call the set comments function or method, which is defined up here, and pass the JSON straight into it. We're getting an error down here because we're not passing in postslug as a dependency. I mentioned here that the dependency is required. So I'm going to pass postslug in as well. So what's effectively going to happen is the first time this component loads, it's going to run this without a postslug, which means it's not going to get anything back. And then when postslug changes, which happens just after the component loads and the postslug is made available to it, then it'll run it again and say, hey, give me the comments. So we could put in an extra line in here saying if postslug is not defined, but I'm not going to worry about that just now. That would save us something in the future if we're looking at performance enhancements. So let's just save that and jump back in over here. We can see the array is now shown up here. And if we refresh the page, the array is still there. And we're making a request over here via get to new beginnings. And we're getting a 404 because we haven't defined that endpoint yet. So let's jump over and define that endpoint. Back into our index.js, which is our API application. We'll come down here. We don't need that anymore. So let's just clean this up a little bit. So now we're going to have an app get. And in fact, it's going to be exactly the same format. So let's just copy that and close that function off. So we're now, when there's a GET request, we now want to make a query for all of the comments in FaunaDB. So we're going to need to reuse this client. I'm just going to stick it up into the main scope up there so we can reuse it down here. We're going to need to do another query. And this query is, this time what we need to do is we need to pull out a list of information. And the way that FaunaDB categorizes that is through pagination. So we're going to do a query to paginate. The stuff that we want to paginate is, or what we want to do within the paginate rather, is to match certain objects based on let me just jump back down to here, the schema. So we've got this comments for all posts query. So we're going to pass in a post slug and we're going to get returned an array of comments. So we need to define this post slug in our index page here. So we need to do a match. And the thing that we want to match is the same thing as up here. Actually, no, we don't want that one. We want q.reference. So we need now a reference to the indexes. And the index was called, not that one, this one here, comments for post. So we're going to make a request to indexes comment for post. And I've just lost my, so this bracket here is that one there. I need to make sure I get in the right areas. So the second parameter into the match is what we're matching it on. And what we're matching it on is the post slug. So in here we put in request.params.postslug. So this is now going to say for all, call the index all comments for post, where it matches the post slug, return the matches and then paginate those. So that's going to take us to the end of here. That's the end of the client query request. Now we need to do a little bit more information at the moment, because right now what we're going to do in what we're going to get in this promise response is not actually a list of all the comments. We're going to get a list of references to objects. So we'll take these reference objects and now we need to go through them and work on them somehow. So the first thing I need is a list of just the references. Let's create an array of just the references, and we'll see an example of what a reference looks like in a second. So let me just here. Reference objects, and we're going to map the value that comes back from the query to get the reference. The response to all of this is going to be in this references variable. So let's now come in and we'll make another query to the client, and we're going to pass all these references straight in. And the response from that's going to be our comments. So this is a two-step process. We're making a request for pagination information, which provides us all the objects. And from that, we can then get all of the actual comments. And we're basically just going to send those straight back to the browser. I'm just going to put a catch down on this one as well. So we're essentially doing a catch on query and a catch here on this query, which is something you have to do. If it fails, then it's quite a catastrophic failure, even if it's just there is no data. So I'm just putting those catches in there. Right, must remember to restart our API. So let's jump in, come back in over here and refresh this page. And now we should get the request here. So now we're getting all of our references. So remember before I said we got an array of references? This is what a reference looks like. But the only thing we really need was that bit there. So that's what our process of breaking that down through the map function was doing. So let's now print out the actual data. So we know here that this is the collection. This here is the comment. So this here is the top level element. So we want the comment.data.author and comment.data.message. So in our comments page here, this is where we're printing all that information out. Let's actually go through all the comments, and we'll map the comment. And we want to output for each comment. Let's just do a paragraph for now. And we're going to put comment.data.message. And then we'll put in an m dash, just to like a little line thing, and comment.data.author. So we hit save and go back to our page here. Without having to reload or do anything, it's automatically pulled out that test message with the we don't know who the author is. This is looking good. So we've now got already a mechanism for, let's just save that, a mechanism for adding comments, test2, submit that. Now I don't have an autoloader at the moment, so I'm just going to hit refresh. And if we go back down to the bottom, because remember it was only loading that first time, we've now got the second comment. So we're about 35 minutes in, and we've already got all of this functionality built in a pretty secure way as well. I'd be quite happy pushing this to production. I'd do a couple of changes, like getting rid of the, in the index page here, getting rid of the secret out of here and putting that into an environment variable. But so far, we're looking pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is add, I don't want just anybody to be able to write comments. I want to add authentication to this. So we're going to jump over to Auth0, and we're going to create an API. So we need to create an API endpoint for our API to be able to receive tokens. So I'm just going to call this API for now. We know that it's running on localhost port 3000. Still can't type. So we'll create that one. And that's pretty much all we need to do at this point in terms of configuring it here. Let's jump into this tab here. We're going to need to install ExpressJWT and JWKRSA, this one. So let's just do that. So ExpressJWT and JWKSRSA, we'll install those two. And now we need to pull these two in. So I'm going to put that up here. Now this part here, the port's already defined. This part here is the, I mean, it's really simple and it's literally copy and paste. You can see that it's put in all the correct values here for me. So you literally can copy and paste out of the live documentation in Auth0. But essentially what this does is it goes off to this endpoint and gets the public key so that any JSON Web Tokens that come in can have their signature verified. So now automatically we have this JWT check, which we can call to see whether or not the JSON Web Token is valid. Now what we could do is just plonk this, plonk, it's a great word, isn't it? Plonk this line in here, which basically means that every single endpoint you need to be authenticated. but we want people to be able to read the comments without authenticating. So I'm going to cut that out of there, and I'm going to put it into the second parameter of the post definition here. So if you go to post, you need to do a data RT check, but if you do a get, you don't. So only this endpoint here now is protected. And in fact, if I hit save and restart, and we jump straight back to our application again, we can already see that if I hit submit now, let's just clear that. If I hit submit, we get an error. What's the error? I'm not running the API. Better start the API again. So we hit this here now. We're now getting a 401. That's authentication denied. So that's what we're posting in, but we're getting a no authorization token was found. So one thing that Auth0 will do for you automatically when you create an API is also create a matching application, test application. You can create your own, or you can use this one. You can use this one and rename it. So you could change this one just to app. And then we can come down here and save those changes. The only thing we need to configure in here now is the callback URL, the logout URL, and the web origin. That's basically to make sure that only applications running on localhost port 8000 can actually use this service. If you go into production, obviously you'll need to change it to your production URLs. So I'm going to put those in there. Again, I'll go down and hit Save Changes. And then I'm going to jump straight into the quick start guide here for, actually, I'll tell you what, this is a machine to machine. So ignore everything I just said. We are going to have to create a new application. And we'll call this one App2, because it's a single page app we're working on. So let's create that. And we can do exactly the same as what we just did. In settings, we're going to paste in these 3 values and hit save. And that's basically it. So if we jump to the quick start guide now, this is what I wanted to get to before. We can see the React guide. We are going to have to make a couple of changes to this because Gatsby isn't quite the same as React. But the main thing we need to do is install this module here. So let's come into our React console here and install that. And then we're also going to need to modify we're going to need to wrap the Auth0 provider around the application. So in React, you just use the React DOM render, where instead of rendering just the app, you wrap this around. This works slightly differently in Gatsby. So we need to come down to the Gatsby browser here. This is some stuff that was in there already. We're going to need to import React again, because we're going to be generating some content. But instead of the renderer, we're going to use wrap-root element. And what this does is provide Gatsby with a function to call to wrap the root element, and it gets past the element into it. So essentially what we're going to do is exactly the same as in this documentation here, where we import the Auth0 provider. And we're going to wrap this around. So let's return the Auth0 provider, then the element, which is this part here. And then we close the Auth0 provider. So that's essentially it. There is one other thing we need to do. This is just for authentication. We want a token that's going to work with our API. So we also need to add in an audience, and the audience is going to be our API endpoint. And because the way the redirection works in Gatsby is slightly different to React, it basically uses a different kind of routing mechanism. We need to add a little bit of extra code in here. Now this, I'll share this. This link will actually be in the repository as well. There's a website here that tells you exactly what this is doing and why you need it. So we define our own custom redirect callback, and we just need to say in here, on redirect callback is now our custom on redirect callback. So that's the only thing that we need to change to be able to add Auth0 into our application. Obviously, we are going to need a login and log out button as well. So let's jump over to our layout here. Now, one of the things that Auth0 does once you've installed it is it gives you this use Auth0 hook. So we can use that to pull information out at any point in our application now that we need access to. So let's define another element, or component, which I'm going to put straight into this layout because it's only going to be used in layout, and we'll add it down below. But essentially, we're going to find out whether or not the module is still loading, whether or not we have a user, And we're also going to get links to the functions to log in and to log out. So if the system's still loading, we're not going to return anything. We don't know whether to show login or log out. If we have a user, we'll show them a logout button. If we don't, then we'll show a login button. So this user nav, we can now just come down to here, and I'm going to stick it between the header and the main area. And we'll put in user nav there. So now if I save this, and we jump back to our application, and we go up to the top, we should have, I might need to, tell you what, I need to start running Gatsby develop again. So this is going to rebuild the application. If you make changes to this Gatsby browser file, you need to restart Gatsby as well. And there's a couple of other reasons you might need to restart Gatsby, but most of the time it's just going to hot load in the background. So while that's loading, I should be able to come over here and hit refresh. And in a second, that's now going to generate the latest version of the application. Just make sure there's no errors. It's not liking something. All right, I realize I'm now at the 45-minute mark. I think we started at about 4 minutes past. So if anybody needs me to speed up and jump straight to the end, let me know. I'm happy to stick around longer. So we've got our login button now. And if we click on that, that's going to take us straight to the login page. This authorization happens because I'm running in localhost. In production, that's not going to come up. So I'm going to say, yes, I authorize this app. And then it comes back. And if we go back to the new beginnings page, we've now got logout. And down at the bottom here now, we've got our form. But if I hit anything in here, we're still going to get this 401 because we're not passing the token in yet. So again, that's relatively easy. Let's go back into the comments part here, where we make this fetch call. We basically want to provide an authorization header. And the value is going to be the word bearer, because it's a bearer token, and the token. But we need this token from somewhere. So in the same way as we had in the layout here, this use Auth0 hook, we can use that Auth0 hook in our comments. And we can call, at this point here, we can pull out a method that's going to help us, which is get token silently, I think it's called. Let me just double check that. I'll be in here, use state. My brain's gone blank. I think it's called get token silently, but I also think that there's another word in there somewhere. Use Auth0. Let me just check this one. It's not going to give it to me easily. Get access token silently. There we go. So we now have this method here, which we can call before making the fetch command. And the response from that is going to be a promise that returns to us the token. So this fetch here can now go in here, and this token now exists. So this is automatically rebuilt. If we now go back over to our browser and hit submit again, we can see that we're getting a 200. And if I type in something we haven't had before, like 123, we get a 200 response, and I hit refresh. We've now got 123 over here. So we know that the post endpoint is securing the information. Let's just change the question mark to something else. So as well as pulling in get access token silently, let's pull in the user. Instead of question mark, we're just going to say user.nickname. There are a couple of other ones we could use. So now, without having to provide my name, I have to log in. And if I hit refresh now and we come back to the end, we'll see a comment with my name, which has been pulled out of my Auth0 account. The final thing that we need to do is if we're logged out, we can still, we have a look at some comments, we can still read the comments, but if I submit anything here, we're going to get an error over here. In fact, it's not going to be over there, it's going to be in the console because it fails before it even makes the request. Because it basically says the person's not logged in, login is required. So let's just hide this form if the user's not logged in. And this is probably the easiest one. So we've already got access to the user here. So let's come down to, in fact, we'll need user. We'll also want is loading. And down here on the text area, we're just going to say this is hidden if we're in loading state or there's no user. So we'll hit save, come back over to our application, and it's gone. So that was pretty much 50 minutes, 49 minutes. I went 4 minutes over, terribly sorry. But we've now got an application written in Gatsby. Yes, it went through it quickly. But the theory is that if we have a look at the code that I wrote, we've got these pages here. So blog post, the only real change that I made was pulling in comments. We created the comments.js, which is 54 lines of code. And we added probably 25 lines of code to this page here, and a little bit to layout. That's all we did there, really. And then we've got our index page over here, which in total is 59 lines of code. I reckon today we wrote about 150 lines of code, and the rest of it is all stuff that we've borrowed from other applications. This is the power of Jamstack, is that you can take existing platforms and mark up and mash them all together. And the power of the platforms is that, and by using the APIs, power of the platforms is that you can start an application like this really fairly quickly. If you try to redo what I did in the past 40 minutes, sure, it might take you a day, but to get something like this up in a day, can you imagine 4 or 5 years ago trying to do that as well? I think we've come a long way in terms of how applications are developed and how easy it is to use off-the-shelf products like Fauna and Auth0 to make your life much easier. We haven't had to write a single line of code about verifying passwords or making sure that there's security within the login pages or having to write to databases. That's all come out of the SDKs that we've pulled in today. So in essence, that's pretty much it. If I go on to this one here, that's my thank you page. I'd love to thank you all for being here and listening. I'm happy to take any questions. It is almost 10 p.m., but I don't usually get to sleep until about 11:30 anyway. So you've got an hour and a half of my time if you would like it. Otherwise, please tell me to go away and stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. It was really nice and very enjoyable session to watch.
Good. I hope it wasn't too fast. I know there was a lot to cover, but I hope that the message that you've all heard is that it's fairly quick to develop your own thing, even if you're not doing it in a compressed time frame like this one.
Yeah, even I learned a really lot with this session, and yeah, it was really nice.
Cool.
So it's time for the question and answer. So all the participants who have any questions, you can use the chat in here and ask some questions from Ben about the sessions you have, or later you can ask about the questions about anything related to authentication or JavaScript.
Yep. Or even if you want to ask questions about anything technology related, even what coffee I'm drinking. I'm currently drinking a Vietnamese coffee with cream. I'm not sure if that's wrong, but it tastes good.
Cool. I really like the way that the content going. I went through from this about 2 files about in the folder, and so what do you think about FaunaDB with the GraphQL things?
I have to say I love it. FaunaDB is one of the first GraphQL cloud-hosted type database services that I've used. About 5 months ago, I was rewriting a URL shortener application that I was working on, and I had it on my own server, and it was MySQL and PHP and various other things. I thought I want to move it all into the cloud. So obviously I used Gatsby, and I think it's on Vercel, although I might have moved over to Netlify recently. I use both of those. And I was looking for a database service, and I personally don't like DynamoDB very much. I find it hard to use. I find the ecosystem of AWS products, because they have so many things and they have to work both well together and well by themselves, I think they have a really hard job at making their products easy to use from the way I think. So I was looking at new opportunities for database storage, and I can't remember how I found Fauna, but I found it. And I just love how quickly you can go in. Like I was looking at the GraphQL stuff just now. If we jump in over here. So putting in the stuff via GraphQL, that is so easy, being able to upload the schema. But even the first time I did it.
I saw the GraphQL playground, so it's kind of very cool for us.
Yeah, exactly. But the first time I used it, this is the URL shortener here. I basically just created my own collections. I created a click collection. I created a redirected collection. I probably shouldn't show you the clicks because there could potentially be sensitive data in there. But essentially, I just manually came in and started creating these shortcodes by providing that data manually. So I was able to get data in really easily for testing. This time in this demo, I put data in programmatically from the beginning. But oftentimes we'll want to precede to be able to test the reading first. So I just found it really easy to use. I've also been looking at dgraph recently, which is another cloud-based database product. And that looks quite interesting too. So I'm actually going to be doing a stream on Monday with one of the dbase people to integrate that with another project that I'm working on. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare.
Yeah, it's really nice that you can build a schema. You can just write the schema and build the whole collection.
Definitely.
And get it
and
up and running within 1 minute.
Yes, that's the other thing. I see there is a question just come in, but I'll just quickly jump in here and do a bit of, so for those of you watching who aren't familiar with GraphQL, I've really only started using it for the past few months myself. But the code that we had for pulling the information out, which is in here, so we had the paginate match go into the comments for post, and we want the post slug, and then we pull the reference objects out. It was fairly, it's very modular, fairly easy to follow, but it's also fairly convoluted. And just looking at it, it's hard to work out what you're doing. Whereas if you use GraphQL instead, you can actually define a query. And in that query, you can say, I want to get out the comments. So I can just say, give me all comments. And I think I might need to put that in there. I'm still fairly new to all of this. And then in here, there's data. And in the data, I've got an author. And if I run that, then I'll probably get an error. Maybe I don't need those after all. There you go. So we've got all the authors out already. I can put in the message. And here we've got JSON response immediately with all of us. So using GraphQL can make our applications even easier again in terms of both the readability of our code and the ease with which we can use the responses. We don't need to parse anything. It just comes back as JSON. So that's really powerful.
So we got a question from,
yes.
Yeah, we got a question from Rangika. Can we use ARC?
What's ARC? I'm not familiar with ARC.
Yeah, Rangika, are you there?
American River College? No. Austin Regional Clinic? Is that? No. I don't know. Tell me more. There was a question. Advanced REST client. I'm not familiar with those either.
This is a thing like Postman.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I use Postman a lot for testing. So if I bring it up here, the way this will work. So you need to find a way of getting a JSON Web Token out. And one way you can do that is through your application itself. You can also build your own tools for logging into Auth0 and getting a token. If I click login and then provide my details, I think it's that one. And over here, go to all, we're going to get, and if we filter by Auth0, we have here the token. And in here, we have an access token and an ID token. So I'm just going to copy this access token here, come back into Postman. And I think that's something else I was working on. So if we go to localhost 3000 comments / new beginning. Obviously, if I try and post to this, I'm going to get a 401 unauthorized. But if I jump into the authorization and I say I want to use a bearer token and I paste that in there, now we get a 200 response. So yeah, totally. It's just an API. It's just an endpoint. It's just authentication. It's all very standards. I'm using Keycloak for a project and I'm getting 2 tokens from the Keycloak, an ID and access token. Why do we need an ID token? So the ID token is what's provided to the application when you log in. Let's just have a look at what one of those looks like.
It's under Auth2 specification, right?
Yes. So when you, essentially an ID token tells you about the user. An access token is a token that you can use to talk to an API on behalf of the user. So let's have a look at what the two different ones look like. I'll open this up twice. So jwt.io is a great resource for checking out what's inside a JSON Web Token. If I paste this one in here, this is the ID token. So that's where the nickname came from that I used as the author name. You can see my email address there. The email is here as well. What Auth0 does when you create an account is it'll use your email address as your name, and it'll use the bit before the @ as your nickname. So it just assumes those. You could then change those later if you wanted to, programmatically from your app. It brings through a picture, tells you whether or not the email is verified. I haven't clicked on the confirmation in the email yet, so that's still false. Shows you who the issuer is, so you know where the person logged in, various other things. If we look at the, where am I going? This one here. If we look at the access token. So this is what we use to talk from the Gatsby app to the API. That's what's sent in the header. And what the API now receives is the token that it can say, look, it was issued at this identity provider. So the API knows that it trusts tokens generated by that API provider. It also knows that its identifier, this identifier doesn't necessarily always have to be the same URL. It doesn't have to be the URL of the API. It's a little bit confusing. It's just an identifier. We use the URL for convention because that's pretty much locked into the API. But it makes sure that its identifier is listed in the audience list. It could be that you've got 7 APIs and 1 front end, and you get a token that is allowed to talk to 3 of those APIs. If it gets sent to one of the other 4, then the other 4 can say, well, this token is not meant for me, so I'm just going to ignore it. So there's another way of doing verification there. So this is basically, it's like a key that the ID token is like my driver's license. It tells you about me. And the access token is like a key. I can give it to you and you can get access to my house. That's where those two come in. I hope that analogy makes sense. And yeah, Keycloak is a standards compliant OpenID OAuth2 identity provider as well, so it would work in the same way. Pubudu asked a question, where does Auth0 store the auth tokens? Is that within the Gatsby app?
Yeah, Pubudu's question.
In general.
Oh, is that?
So I'm still not quite sure though. Is that the Auth0 SDK in any front-end app? Okay, so if you're looking at a single page app, then the token gets sent back. Essentially what happens, I don't know whether we can see it here, but when you log in, there'll be a string that's passed on to the end. We can't get to it because it's not in the history, which is a good thing. Oh no, there we are. We do have it. So we get this code that comes back. This is called an auth code. What your application then does is it goes off to the Auth0 server and says, here's an auth code, give me the token. And because the token is then sent by a response to a post request, as opposed to in the URL of a redirect, it's a lot harder to inject a token into an application in the wrong way. So that's how the token gets into the application. That's a fairly secure way of getting it in. Once it's in the application, there are 3 different places you could store it. One of them is the cookie. I recommend never to use a cookie. For the same reason, I would also recommend not to use local storage, although if you are going to want to persist it after a session finishes, local storage is better than a cookie, just because there are slightly more protection mechanisms around it. The reason why I would prefer not to store it in either of those is because a cross-site injection attack or a malicious plugin in the browser could potentially get access to that. So what normally happens, and what happens by default with the Auth0 SDK, is it gets stored in memory, basically. So the Auth0 object stores it in a let token equals blah, and then it can access that while it's in memory. Of course, then if you do a page reload, that gets wiped. So that's where using local storage could help. But there's another step on top of that. So the get access token silently method that I called, what that does is it'll access the token that's in memory. But if it's not in memory, then it'll go off to Auth0 and say, hey, me, this browser, I've got a session with the Auth0 login page. I don't have a session anywhere else because there's no other server, but I've got a session cookie with Auth0. So I'm going to make an HTTP request to Auth0 to request a new token. And that then gets returned back to the application and injected into the Gatsby app or into the single page app framework. So it can regenerate a token and put that back into memory so you don't have to persistently store it. It does mean that if a token expires or if somebody does a right-click open in a new tab, then it's got to go off and get that token, which adds a little bit of delay, sure, but it increases your security. So generally, the answer is in memory, but you can put it in local storage. And the local storage is actually just a configuration switch, which off the top of my head, I can't remember where it goes, but you pass it in as a parameter to the Auth0 SDK, not the React one. The React one is configured in a different way. But when you instantiate the Auth0 client object from the standard JavaScript SDK, you pass in a parameter saying storage equals localhost or something like that.
Yeah, even with this recent update with the browsers, there's an issue with the same site cookies. So Auth0 domain is actually not in your application domain. So normally it won't be kept in the cookie storage because of that.
That's right.
Even
so that's
Safari,
where local storage comes in useful as well. Did that answer your question as well, Chatu? You said you were going to add something to it.
I thought of adding to the advanced REST client question. So for the Postman, I think there was a good article from Auth0 blog, how to integrate the Auth0 as an Auth2 provider to the Postman, so you don't need to manually get the tokens.
Yeah, so they've got this one here which works with the Auth0 API. So if you're making a request to Auth0 specifically with a token, you can do this integration here. It's got a whole lot of collections. Although you might be right, it might work with your own APIs as well. Cool. Any other questions? Do I drink tea? Not very often.
Yeah, Ceylon tea is the best tea that you can find.
Ooh, I don't know. From Sri Lanka probably. Yeah, very big condition there. I like Earl Grey myself. I love the taste of. I've forgotten what the extra herb is they put in there. Can't remember, but yes. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I know there are often people who don't like asking questions live. My handles on all the social medias are up at the top right-hand corner there, Ben Dechrai. You can email me at ben@bendechrai.com as well if you like, but my DMs on Twitter are open. I will be putting this up onto my GitHub repository at some point. So I think the best way for me to get that to you is I'll probably share that with you, Chatu, and you can send that out to the group afterwards. But yeah, also you can just keep an eye on my GitHub repo, github.com/bendechrai, and there'll be a demos/Jamstack type thing up there soon.
Yeah, that will be great. I will share it with the community.
Cool.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions related to JavaScript or authentication or anything related to technology? And
also, if there's anything that I went through during the demo that if you want me to go over it again in a bit more depth, I'm happy to go through the demo components as well.
And if you're actually thinking about moving to or learning about Gatsby, Gatsby has a really good documentation. You can just follow around. That's a complete step-by-step process with all the descriptions about what is going on and what is about GraphQL, how it's going on, and how to configure everything.
Definitely. Yeah, I used a lot of that's the actual Gatsby app. I used a lot of the Gatsby documentation to learn more about React as well. It was pretty good for that.
Yeah, they also have good documentation about React also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think there's another question from Prabhu. We can a small, very short intro to GraphQL.
To the extent that I know much about GraphQL, because like I say, I've only been using it myself for a short period of time, but essentially it's, so you know how a standard API, you make a request, like in our case, we had localhost port 3000 /comment/post name. So that is going to return a fixed response every single time, and there's a fixed request. So the downside to this is that if you are an API provider and your customers or your developers, external developers are using your API, if they need some extra bit of information from you, then you've got to modify your API, which means you've then got to look at API versioning, make sure there's no backwards compatibility breaks and all of these things. What GraphQL is essentially a way of doing both reads and writes. So you can actually create through GraphQL as well as read through GraphQL. But like I defined in this playground here, you can define exactly what you want. If you want the author and the message, you can request the author and the message. If this was a REST-based endpoint, that's all you'd be able to get. If I then also wanted to get the timestamp and your endpoint didn't provide that to me, then you would have to make modifications, whereas I can just update my request and get the timestamp back. So GraphQL is a way of allowing your developers in a safe way. You can still define what they have access to. There's access control. But in a safe way, your developers can now request the type of data that gets sent back and the format of that, like the timestamp. You can even, I can't remember exactly how to do it. Again, I'm fairly new to GraphQL myself, but you can provide a parameter to the timestamp to get it to generate the timestamp in a particular format. So instead of this timestamp here, you could actually have it come up as the 17th of July 2004 or whatever it actually is in the format that you want. The other advantage, which is kind of the flip side of exactly the same coin, is imagine if you had all of this information here and we're getting errors down here for some reason. I don't know. Let's ignore that because we do. It's because there's a null in here. So there are assumptions around required fields, which is throwing an error. So say, for instance, you're getting all this information here, but you actually only want the first item, and you could do a query or whatever else. What you can do is you can put in a limit, which I don't quite remember exactly how to do. Maybe it's just that. Limit on fields, all comments, no. But yes, you can provide limits, and also you could say, well, all I want, I don't care about the author or the message, all I want is the timestamp, all I want is the message. So you can even make the response that you're getting back smaller based on just what you need. So it gives your developers more control without you losing security. And also by being able to control exactly what data comes back, it makes the website more performant because you're only getting the information you need rather than all of the data. My example here with the responses where we got all of the data back and I had to filter through and pull out just these two here. If I'd been using GraphQL, it would have been really easy for me in the API to say, just give me the name and the message and return those. That wasn't really short, but it was a bit of an intro.
kind of declarative data fetching. Cool. So I think it's about 1 hour past now, right? No, more than 1 hour and 15 minutes. Now we've got it online, and thank you. I think it's time to be kind of wrapping up the session.
I think that's fair enough. Thank you everybody for sticking around this long.
Yeah, I think I will give you about 1 or 2 minutes to ask the question if there's any.
Sure.
So we did about, we actually started with an empty project and we installed Gatsby, and then we actually fairly created the comment component, and then we created our API endpoint to post the comments, and then we created another endpoint to get the comments, and we changed our comment component to display the comments and also accepting the posting the comments. Then we actually put the authentication. We created an Auth0 application and we get the configuration from there, and we created the Auth0 provider and just wrap the whole document that is built by the Gatsby. And then we actually keep the authentication going on, and we get it using use Auth0 hook. And we completed the whole project within about 45 minutes.
We did. I'm impressed.
Also. Yeah, me too. So now you can actually build this Gatsby project and host in GitHub pages, or you can host it in Netlify, or you can host it in Vercel. So anywhere that support.
If you use GitHub pages, there's a little bit of a complexity around hosting Gatsby applications. GitHub Pages works really well with Jekyll, which is one of the other static site generators. But Jekyll doesn't generate out of the box anything with a single page app framework like React or Vue. So if you're using Gatsby, there are ways of hosting Gatsby in GitHub, but I would recommend going for something like Vercel or Netlify instead. It's really trivial to get it up and running in one of those environments.
Yeah, the Netlify is really fast because they have CDN and all stuff already come home set up, and they give free support to custom domains also, and the sites hosted there is pretty fast.
Yeah.
And same with Vercel.
Yeah. Definitely. I would recommend either of those two. I actually started using Vercel originally, back when it was still called Zeit. And I started looking at Netlify probably about 3 months ago. And yeah, they're slightly different in the way they work, but they're both really powerful. So I'd recommend either of them quite happily.
Yeah, both of them has really good documentation.
Yep. So the one thing I didn't want to use, so the other project that I'm working on at the moment is this project called hoist.earth. And this is also a Gatsby application. This is hosted on Netlify, but the API I'm running on Vercel. And I think the reason is, that's right, to run an Express app on Netlify is more complicated than on Vercel. On Vercel, you just upload an extra JSON file and it works. Whereas Netlify, you need to convert them into Netlify Lambda functions, and it was a bit
functions.
So yeah.
Yeah, they just wrap the Lambda functions, so yeah, kind of a tricky to get the Netlify functions up and running.
That's right.
But for the Vercel, if you use Next.js, you can just write API just in the same folder, and you have the whole static application and the API just running in the same project.
Yes.
Or you can host your own API.
There is one other thing you need to do with, we go into the hoist API. One other thing you need to do if you're running an Express app sharing any secrets is this. Why is it? I think I'm in the wrong branch, maybe. Actually, it'll be, I can't type, github.com/hoist.earth API. So there's this one file, the now.json. You just need to put this bit in there so that it knows to build it and run it against the node server, because the Vercel built-in APIs don't run against a standard node server. So if you want to run index.js as a node application, which is what Express is, you need this extra line in there. And then I just have one route, which basically says every single route that you could ever handle, send it straight off to the index page. And then obviously some core stuff. So if you put this file in, then that'll make your Vercel app work with Express.
I said now JSON.
Yeah, I think you can call it Vercel.json now as well.
Oh, yeah, they renamed it, I think. The both still works, I think.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's cool. I hope to get you more and more sessions later. I'll catch you later.
Definitely.
Yeah. And
you're welcome, Janica.
So to try and wrap it up, I'm going to thank Ben for allocating your night time, even though it's very late night for you, to communicate with our community and doing this session. Thank you very much for it.
It's been fun.
Yeah, and I would like to thank Auth0 for hosting this event with the Zoom account, where we can do the live stream into Facebook and all the without no limitation for the participants. That's really cool. And I would like to thank all my community who just joined as our participants and make this very successful event. Hope to see you in next session. And last but not least, I want to thank Pupudu and the whole team of Difficult, that's who actually handled the social media campaign and all the designs for this one. Thank you very much for that one. Yeah, that's cool. We're getting a lot of feedbacks now from the community.
Lots of thank yous. You're all very welcome. I've had fun.
Cool. Till next time then.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, have a nice day.